When Trump first floated the idea of setting a new target that would oblige NATO members to spend 5% of their GDP on defence, no one really took it seriously. After all, not only was it more than double the current 2% target, it was also more than any NATO member, including the US, was spending at the time. However, over the past couple of months, the idea has apparently gained momentum, and it looked set to be finalised at today's NATO summit. Although split into 3.5 on defence and 1.5 on security, which was more widely defined. That was, however, until Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez came out last week to dismiss the idea as, quote, not only unreasonable, but also counterproductive. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why some people don't like the new 5% target, and why Europe should probably focus on getting more out of the money it's already spending, rather than just blindly pouring good money after bad. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's get straight into it. The most obvious reason that at least some NATO members don't like this new target is that it's not obvious that they can afford it. Many NATO members are already running pretty large deficits, with countries like France and Poland running record deficits of about 6% of GDP. Which means, assuming that the EU doesn't decide to issue trillions more in joint borrowing, these countries will need to cut spending or raise taxes in order to be able to increase their defence spending. Whether that's a good idea or not, recent events suggest that European electorates aren't so keen on it. Sánchez basically said that he wouldn't cut welfare spending to pay for defence, while France has been trying and failing to pass a budget for the best part of a year, because no one wants tax hikes or spending cuts. Nonetheless, defence hawks would argue that electorates should suck it up, and that deterring and defeating Russia should be Europe's priority. But this overlooks the fundamental problem with European defence spending, namely that European governments get terrible bang for their buck. As numerous commentators have recently pointed out, collectively the EU already spends quite a lot on defence. In 2024, for instance, EU member states collectively spent 326 billion euros on defence, roughly 1.9% of the EU's overall GDP of about 17 trillion euros, and way more than Russia, which spent about 112 billion euros, according to CEPA analysis. European armies already have some 1.5 million active duty troops, more than not only Russia, but also the United States. Nor does this represent just some post-Ukraine spike. In fact, according to calculations by historian Adam Tooze, European NATO members have collectively spent $3.1 trillion on defence over the past decade, and $9 trillion since the fall of the Soviet Union. This is at least 10 times what Russia has spent in the same time period. And if you just looked at the numbers, you would assume that even without America, NATO would have no problem dealing with Russia. And yet, apparently that's not the case. The NATO Secretary General is currently doing the rounds warning European militaries that they aren't ready to face Russia, and Russia's military industrial output is now higher than Europe's, according to a recent RUSI report. So why do European militaries spend so much but get so little? Well, when you dig into the data, two big reasons emerge. The first is that European countries spend more of their defence budgets on soldiers' salaries and pensions, and less on what we might consider investments, i.e. weapon systems and other hardware. You can sort of see this if you compare procurement spending across Western militaries. European countries spend far less on procurement per soldier than the US, which implies that European countries are spending more on just paying the soldiers to be there, and less on buying them new fancy kit. But even when European countries do buy new hardware, they get terrible value for money. Just look at how much it costs to produce a tank in different countries. The latest variant of Germany's Leopard tank, for instance, comes in at roughly 29 million euros, roughly 7 times what it cost Russia to produce a T-90, and 12 times what it cost China to produce a Type 99A. Sure, the Leopard might be more advanced, but it's clearly also being produced less efficiently. A similar trend also appears when you look at artillery systems. A French howitzer, for instance, will set you back 6 million euros, and a German one at least 11. Again, this is many times more than either a Russian or Ukrainian system, both of which come in at about 2 million euros. So why are European weapon systems so expensive? Well, the main reason seems to be economies of scale. In short, European defence manufacturers mostly serve their domestic militaries, which means that they don't actually produce that many systems. Unsurprisingly, the data suggests that the more systems you produce, the cheaper they get, which is why American, Chinese, and Russian systems tend to be cheaper than their European equivalents. The implication of this is that if European governments want to get better bang for their buck, they need a less fragmented defence industry that spans the continent. Although, of course, unifying Europe's defence industry will require European politicians to give up on their dreams of self-sufficiency and might not be welcomed by big European arms companies, who have so far had an easy ride in producing overpriced kit for their domestic militaries. Nonetheless, if Europe wants to take its security seriously, this is sort of necessary. Not only would it mean better value for money, it would also make it easier for European militaries to cooperate. A 2018 analysis, for instance, found that European NATO members had collectively 6 times as many different weapon systems as the US, which makes it harder for European armies to cooperate, as they presumably have to do in the face of Russian aggression. Anyway, you get the point. European defence spending is embarrassingly wasteful, and setting an ambitious spending target, like 5% of GDP, will just mean wasting more cash on an incredibly inefficient system, especially if it's combined with an ambitious timeline. So maybe European governments should first focus on improving value for money via better integration before they start splashing the cash. And when you stop to think about it, this sort of makes sense. After all, we don't set spending targets for any other area of government policy. It's not like we say that we should spend 5% of GDP on education. Rather, we decide the outcomes we want to achieve. In education, for instance, we have the OECD's PISA ranking to measure student performance across countries, and then try and achieve those outcomes while spending as little as possible. In this light, perhaps NATO will be better off setting targets for how many soldiers or tanks or drones it wants, and then finding the most cash-efficient way to get there. Because judging militaries solely by how much they spend is probably one of the reasons that military expenditure has become so wasteful over time. Now, when talking about topics like these, it's important to be precise, and precision is also crucial to our sponsor this week, Henson Shaving. Henson's AL13 razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, perfectly holds blades at a 30-degree angle and extends them only 0.0013 inches, less than the width of a human hair, which means incredibly tight tolerances, very high standards, and superb precision, offering a much healthier shave compared to the overpriced plastic razor cartridges. And speaking of plastic, Henson's razors are completely plastic-free. From the blade to the box, everything Henson sends you is entirely recyclable, meaning that while you protect your skin from expensive razor burn, you're also protecting the environment from adding to the 2 billion razor cartridges that are thrown away every year in the US alone. Finally, buying Henson razors is simply cheaper. No longer will you be forced into buying those expensive and unsupportive replacement blades, as Henson blades cost about 10 cents each. This means that you can replace your blades far more frequently, so you don't need to keep dragging a dull razor across your face in order to get value out of that overpriced plastic. If you want to try it out, then you can go to hensonshaving.com/TLDR or click the link in the description. And then you can add a razor and 100 blades to your cart. Once you've done that, add discount code TLDR at checkout and you'll get all of those blades totally free. And you'll be on the way to a healthier shave.